Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, brothers and sisters around the world, it is I, Crucial, your chocolate Nubian soul brother. And I thought I would address the topic of vegans versus vegetarians. And it's a little concerning the fact that I even have to address this, because ultimately these are people that are taking it upon themselves to lessen the violence that they perpetrate on these beautiful creatures that we are sharing the world with. And kudos to those that do that. The problem is, often what you see, particularly on the interwebs, are these militant vegans. I guess you would call them the abolitionists. They're self-proclaimed abolitionists. They're buying into this whole idea that one must completely remove themselves from animal agriculture, from any form of exploitation. Taking the term abolitionism, which, by the way, is a reference to the abolitionism that took place a couple of hundred years ago, which by definition meant the prohibition of these practices through law, which was all about passing legislation to prevent the barbarous practices that would take place in slavery, but was not relating to removing yourself by not purchasing, let's say, slave items. Items that have been created by slaves. Now, I say this because the approach that many of the self-proclaimed abolitionists in the animal rights community put forth is that you must be completely, utterly removed from any form of animal exploitation, which, by the way, is also a very slippery definition. Oh, you're using an animal. You have guide dogs. Oh, wait a sec. You ride a horse. You're exploiting animals. Now, there are people that want to take it to that extreme, which is something that I think most of us would not be in line with. Now, people that have this mentality, I would invite you to first consider that if you pay tax, which is most likely, unless, of course, you're living in a country like Dubai or Denmark, where I understand it's an option if you want to choose to have your monies go to, let's say, the military-industrialized complex there. For the most part, your dollars are going towards supporting the worst organization as far as its violation of human rights issues, particularly if you live in the United States. Your dollars are going towards supporting a country that is responsible for manifesting the greatest amount of violence in this Euclidean meat space that we are immersed in. And therefore, you are still complicit. The fact that these organizations, particularly in the United States, often subsidize the cost of the meat and dairy industry, these industries that you are proclaiming to completely removing yourself from. And I'm saying this not because I'm wanting to point fingers. I too am complicit, of course, to some extent in this industry as well. But I'm trying to invite you to consider the idea that ultimately, whereas you're trying to completely remove yourself 100% from this, you cannot do that. It is currently an impossibility. Therefore, to make the argument that because you are connected to this, you are still complicit is unwise and stupid. And I would invite you to consider this. Now, by being vegan, you are not completely removing yourself from violence. You are striving to do so. It is based off the concept of Ahimsa, which basically means nonviolence. It's taken from the Jain tradition. Bearing in mind, the Jains take this whole concept to a much higher level, abstaining from even having root vegetables because of the organisms that are killed when these are plucked from the ground. They won't even pluck out their hair for certain factions within the Jain community because they don't want to kill the organisms, which sounds a little ridiculous, let's be honest. But I want you to bear in mind that there are people that always take this to a much higher level. And whereas kudos to people that are taking it upon themselves to reduce the violence that they perpetuate in this world, kudos to you. I salute you. Boom. It is good to have humility and have some understanding. And stop making this ridiculous argument that people have not made the full transition, because you haven't made the full transition either. The full transition is trying to minimize the harm that you impact in this world. And granted, there definitely is a line. I guess some of us have different ideas as to where that line is. And it becomes difficult because the problem is systemic, because there is a diffusion of responsibility. And we're all supporting these industries to varying degrees. It becomes very difficult. If this was a case of people directly performing violence, people directly, let's say, killing someone or killing an animal or stealing or harming someone in any way, shape, or form directly, this would be a very clear-cut issue. Don't do those things, period. But as soon as you enter the realm of the diffusion of responsibility, where you enter the realm of moral culpability through proxy, by supporting someone or an organization indirectly because they're doing something that is wrong, it becomes a very difficult problem. This is why I urge people to have a bit of humility and understanding and compassion in regards to this issue. In regards to vegetarians, bearing in mind that often as a vegetarian, referring to ovo-lacto-vegetarianism, if you were consuming these byproducts, often, not always, and this is a mistake that a lot of vegans tend to make. They tend to make the generalization that if you're a vegetarian, you're complicit in these industries. Not necessarily. I have the integrity and honesty to at least acknowledge this. Now, granted, they are connected to these industries, and we're well aware of the horrors of the dairy and egg industries. I don't need to go into that. You don't need to purchase eggs through these industries. I mean, the vegetarians that want to continue to consume eggs, as unhealthy as they may be, if you want to consume these eggs from backyard sources, from a non-slaughter source, so from a family that is taking care of these chickens, they're not harming them, I don't have a problem with that. I think it would be a little ridiculous for someone to have a problem with that, unless, of course, they're these culty vegans that maintain that you're still exploiting these animals because you're taking their eggs, which, by the way, they have no use for. They don't even want. And, of course, people want to make the argument, militant vegans, that you could feed these eggs to these chickens and be complicit in their cannibalism. But the only reason that eggs are often consumed by these chickens is usually due to overcrowding, and it's definitely not it's not a normal practice that we see. To be completely honest, look, it would be akin to me stealing someone's shit and a third party having an issue with me stealing their shit and saying that I'm taking something that is not theirs. It's shit. It's a stupid argument. It's bullshit. No pun intended. And of course, the people that want to make the argument that ultimately by having these eggs, you're still supporting an industry, even if it's through backyard sources, because this whole argument around the fruit of the poisonous tree, that you're basically benefiting from something that came from a horrible environment, which is a ridiculous argument. If you want to make the fruit of the poisonous tree argument, you need to realize that everything that we see in society is built off of the creations of other things. Therefore, by even being, let's say you're a white person, I'm not trying to play the race card over here, but many of the benefits that have come to you have come because your ancestors exploited, let's say, the African race. Now, if you want to play that argument because of the fact that you're benefiting from that, it's wrong. Let's not play the fruit from the poisonous tree argument. It's one of the worst arguments anyone could think of. So look, that addresses the whole area of eggs. In regards to the dairy industry, once again, you don't necessarily require to perform violence on these animals. Often it does require that. Often you do need to separate these beautiful calves from their cows. And if that's happening, don't be complicit in that. But if you want to be a vegetarian that continues to consume dairy in situations where this is not taking place, and there are farms, as few as they may be in the West, there are definitely farms within India and around the world that don't partake in these standard industry practices, that don't separate their calves from their mothers, that often put their bulls with the cows, don't force impregnate these cows, and they don't partake in so many of the horrible practices that we see within the dairy industry. Therefore, you don't necessarily need to perform violence on these animals in order to obtain their milk. And I find that a lot of vegans lose sight of this fact and want to buy into this generalization that you are still partaking in violence if you're a vegetarian, which is false. Now, granted, I personally don't consume these products because I think it's unhealthy. Let's at least acknowledge that it's better for the environment if you are not consuming these products. However, if you want to continue to do so as a vegetarian, in conditions when you were taking care that the byproducts have not been obtained through violence, there's nothing wrong with that. And this is coming from someone that is going to be completely honest about the issue. Rather than buying into this, you need to make the full transition and go vegan. You don't need to go vegan. What you can do is ensure that you are not partaking in these horrible practices. And you don't need to be vegan to do that. You can be vegetarian if you're being careful about it. Quite frankly, I would encourage people to go vegan because it's healthier and it's better for the environment, and because of the current system that we're in, many of the byproducts requires us to be complicit in these industries. Now, bearing that in mind, yes, it's better, it's easier to go vegan, but I'm not going to make that definitive rule. So look, in short, that's my perspective on vegetarianism, on veganism. Veganism is without a doubt better. But of course, there are forms of vegetarianism that actually take it to a higher level than the veganism that we see most people subscribing to. And the ideology that I see around the modern form of veganism, bearing in mind that veganism has gone through many transitions, is something that I see as being very pernicious. The idea of not having any involvement with animals. Ultimately, vegans want to see liberation of these animals, but some vegans define this as not even having any pets, as not even using animals in any way, shape, or form, not even using their manure. I see that as being completely, utterly ridiculous. And I think if you looked at this from an intuitive perspective, it would create no discord within you. This is all about conscience. Most of us have the conscience to realize when we're doing something that is not in line with ourselves, with our higher aspects of ourselves. So it's about looking within and trying to make that decision for yourself. And fundamentally, my issue on all social justice movements has always been, provided you are not harming anyone, you have a right to do what the hell you want. Granted, I acknowledge that, yes, it's better to avoid doing a lot of things because of health reasons, because of environmental reasons. Those reasons are not enough to prevent people from doing them if they want to continue doing that. If people want to continue to have sugar in ridiculous amounts, if people want to continue to smoke substances that are not good for them. For instance, I got into an argument with someone just the other day, and they were talking about how marijuana should become illegal because it makes the community a worse environment, because people that go onto marijuana often go onto other harder substances. And it's a completely flawed argument in that whereas you are not directly doing any harm by consuming marijuana, it is your right to do so. If you do not have sovereignty over your own body, if you cannot decide what you put into your own body, you don't have any freedom whatsoever. And because you are not directly harming anyone by doing this, the idea of saying that, oh, you shouldn't have marijuana because it's eventually going to cause harm on the environment, on the community, is a completely ridiculous argument, something I don't subscribe to. And I say this because whereas I realize that certain things may not be healthy, I completely acknowledge that it's people's right to continue consuming these products. And whereas I encourage people to do certain things because it's healthier, it's better for them, I won't say it as a definitive thing. So look, if you want to go vegan, absolutely go vegan. If you want to go vegetarian and be a mindful vegetarian about where you are sourcing your byproducts from, I also don't have a problem with that. And also, it is incumbent upon us to relinquish our support of the military industrialized complex, which, in all honesty, is responsible for some of the worst violence that we see in this world. We should all be moving towards nonviolence, not be attaching ourselves to this label purely because we all want to feel part of some community. I've never been a student of subscribing to any ideology. My religion is truth. Ladies and gentlemen, freaks and geeks, peace out, keep it real, don't drive in text. This is Chris Schul. These are my thoughts on vegetarianism, on veganism, and on the military industrialized complex. Until next time, peace out, don't drive in text. Ow!
Life's purpose is to feel joy. Metaphysical, lyrical, saying up for truth. The only one to make change is walking in your shoes. Be the example, don't complain about the news. Making music and serving the world with the loo. Now you can be the same, or you can be the change. Find strength from inside, break through the chains. No one to blame, nothing to prove. You